morning, everyone. We have our coffee chat this morning with Chane Polo, who is a board member of ours, and Michaela again. And we are really excited because this is our third one. So we're going to jump right into it. Chane, can you give us an intro to you and the organization you work for?
Absolutely. So my name is Chane Polo, as Amber said. I am the Senior Policy Advisor at the Colorado Water Congress. I've been there for about a little over 5 years now. And a little bit about CWC, the Colorado Water Congress is a subdivision of the state, or a nonprofit, if you will. We're a member-driven organization, and we have between 1,000 and 2,000 individual members and over 400 organizational members. And our call is to provide leadership and advocacy on behalf of the water community of the state of Colorado. The way I like to portray it is we act as the go-between the water community and the policymakers. So we help shape positive legislation, or legislation that would be beneficial to Colorado water users in the state. And we act in the event that we see legislation or litigation that would work contrary to our members' best interests. And we're, like I said, member driven, so it's a cooperative effort, but we try to provide that leadership in all aspects of legislation or policy that would affect the water community.
That's awesome. And for those who are listening who may not know, DARCA and CWC have this really cool partnership where we have reciprocal membership. So if you're a member of DARCA, you're also a member of CWC, which is a fantastic opportunity. So just wanted to plug that in there too.
And if you have any questions about the reciprocal membership, or where to access our information, or what tools we have that we could provide for you that might be helpful, just reach out to me. I'm always happy to help, and I'm sure Amber is as well.
That's awesome. You've had such an interesting path to water and DARCA. Could you tell us how you've come to the place that you're at now?
Absolutely. My road to water was definitely a windy one. I focused my education and my training on natural resources as a whole, with a little bit of a focus on energy. And I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with my bachelor's degree, and then decided to pursue my law and master's degree from the University of Wyoming. I thought, if you're going to study natural resources, this is the geographical place to do it and get the best exposure that you possibly can. I was very fortunate during my time in law school to cross paths with Christine Arbogast, who is the president of Kogozic and Associates, one of the prime lobbying firms in the state. And she introduced me to the Colorado Water Congress right after I graduated about to graduate in 2015. I started off as a volunteer at the Water Congress summer event, which I learned very quickly was a prime spot to network, meet people in the industry, and learn more about natural resources, and of course, water specifically. And the beautiful thing about my education is that energy, natural resources, and water, they're really all connected. And they're all so important to our day-to-day life and the livelihood of humanity. And that's exactly where I wanted to be. And by meeting the people at this event, by learning more about the topic, the complicated issues, the problems, the necessary things that we need for the survival of water, my passion for water specifically just continued to grow. And in a sort of romantic way, my career grew from that very first volunteering effort at the Water Congress. You know, I volunteered for 3 days, and a few months later I was an intern, and a few months after that I was hired on to work full time, and I haven't looked back. And I've been very, very lucky to have been surrounded by the people that I have been surrounded by, and to watch my own career grow in this wonderful community. So I've already learned a tremendous amount, and just continuously excited by the number of people and the types of people that I've been meeting in the process. So loving every moment of it. But I'm curious, Michaela and Amber, what about you two? How did you two get into the world of water?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Go for it.
Okay, mine kind of started as a volunteer experience too. I grew up on a farm and ranch, so always kind of had the water idea in the back of my head. And my dad always told me I should be a water lawyer because A, it would make a lot of money, he thought, and B, he thought I could argue with a brick wall. So he thought that those were two pretty good reasons for me to go into water law. But actually, what really got me started was I had met this guy who is now my husband, and he was working at CSU in their like water division and doing water research. And so I volunteered with him for a little bit on the salinity project. So it all kind of started there. And as he got more into water, so did I. So that's kind of how it all came about. And then I had a few years where I was a teacher and wasn't as involved, and then opened my own business and got super involved.
That's
What about
wonderful.
you,
I
Caitlin?
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Awesome. I guess my path to DARCA also started as a volunteer. So I grew up in Weld County, and there was agriculture all around. So I was obsessed with being outside. I just loved, like, I knew I wanted to do something where I knew I could be outside. So I thought I wanted to be a civil engineer, and then that changed in college. And so now I'm in the soil and crop sciences. But the real key to all of my choices has been I've always like loved water, and I knew how important it was to agriculture. I knew how important it was to my community, and I loved, since I grew up on like the urban side in a rural community, like not being directly tied to agriculture. I knew how important it was for both municipal and agricultural uses, and so I wanted to really learn how to, I don't know, kind of like bridge those gaps and help both parties involved, because agricultural is uses is just as important as municipal and recreational. So I really loved learning about the branches between all of those. And so that was kind of a neat pathway. And then I was in the Colorado FFA Association, which is how I met Amber and how I got involved in DARCA. And then my water experience, just keeping that on my primary focus of I'm studying this because I want to know how it interacts with water, has really just blossomed over the last 4 years. And so as I begin to wrap up this time, I'm sure my next step will be in water resources in some way or another.
That's awesome. It's cool how we've all kind of started in volunteer activities. That's kind of neat. So we kind of opened with talking about CWC, and they both have their differences or their similarities between the two organizations, you know, CWC and DARCA, but we also have some differences as well. You guys are a lot more policy driven and leadership driven, and we just offer things. What do you like about being a part of both organizations?
Well, I'll say I think DARCA offers a little more than that. No, I completely understand. You know, I started, my exposure and experience was primarily through CWC. I've only truly been more active in DARCA in the last couple of years. And so it's been an interesting way to shift and understand the two different organizations better that way. CWC is big picture. We represent not just DARCA members, but we represent municipalities, cities, attorneys, engineers, everybody, anyone that has a connection to water. We help or provide leadership in some way or another. What the beautiful thing about DARCA is it's a very specific group of people with very specific interests. And so to have worked from the broader perspective of things, or at least tried to help on the broader perspective of things, as we engage with stakeholders and we engage in the conversation on policy that affects water, having that expertise from the stakeholders of DARCA is just absolutely priceless. And so I love that if there is a piece of legislation or policy or something that is affecting agriculture, for example, I know exactly who I can call, because those are the people that are going to be affected by something like that. And I can just call on up and say, what do you think about this? Do you think it would be better this way or the other way? And how can I help enact that change? And so I love that I get the specific and the experience from DARCA members, and it only reinforces and strengthens what I can do on the bigger scale of things through CWC. So it's really the best of both worlds to be a part of both.
Awesome. I appreciate that.
That is really, really cool. And I've had an interest in policy for a long time too. And I'd love to hear, like, what is it about water policy that really intrigues you?
Yeah, that's a big question. I mean, like I said at the beginning, water is at the crux of livelihood and survival. And to be a part of the conversation involved in such an important topic is just absolutely fulfilling, rewarding, and invigorating to me. We all need water, whether you have one political orientation or preference or another, whether you're an older person, a younger person, you've got a higher education, you don't, you decided to join the workforce early. It really doesn't matter because water connects us all. And I love that about water itself. And I love that the policy side is where you can really enact that change. I've always been driven to help as many people as I possibly can, and to be involved in policy is exactly the tool that can help you enact that change, especially through CWC on such a large scale. And you know, what I've learned is the best way to do that is through a stakeholder process and through collaboration. So the people as well are just as important to me in water policy. And I think we're all very fortunate because the people in Colorado that are involved with water are a very special kind of people. They all care, they're all passionate, and they all want to work as hard as they can to ensure the livelihood of this natural resource. And it's a privilege to work with this water community. And so it's water, it's policy, it's collaboration, it's all of it combined that makes it really fun to work in this job every single day. So yeah, I feel very lucky.
You know, before coming to this job, I was never really involved in legislation or policy, and I didn't realize how collaborative it was. So it's just kind of fun to see like how small the water community really is, because everybody truly knows everybody.
You know, that's a really good point, Amber. You don't know that when you first start. You know, when it's nice, all three of us were volunteers. You know, when you're first starting and you're just kind of there absorbing it all, it's quite overwhelming because you see all these people with all these credentials, and it's amazing to sort of watch and listen and you know, God forbid, even be a part of the conversation. And the more you gain that experience, the more you realize, you know, how close knit this community really is. And the best way to make anything happen is to just talk to people, ask the questions, you know, push for something. If it's something you truly care about, you never know what'll happen. And so the more you get yourself out there, the more you collaborate, the more you have these kinds of conversations, the more something is likely to happen. And water community in Colorado, it's like everybody knows everybody. I'm shocked by that more and more every day, because you think hey, I just met someone new that no one else quite knows yet. No, that's not true. Everyone has a tie to everybody. It's really, really funny.
Yeah, it is for sure. So speaking of legislation, we just got over a legislative session this year, last week. Can you give us a rundown of what that was like and what happened throughout that session?
Oh my gosh, everyone's through the pandemic has heard the term Zoom fatigue. And I think legislative fatigue is true of this 2021 legislative session. The legislative session has a maximum calendar of 120 days, excuse me, and they generally start sometime the second week of January. This year, that was January 13th. Because of the unusual circumstances of the last 18 months now or so, the legislature convened on January 13th and then went automatically on temporary recess the next day for about a month. And that was in part because the legislature needed to think through safety protocols and, you know, given some of the work that was lost last year due to the pandemic, how to kind of incorporate that with the timeline of this legislative session. So we met for one day, took a break, and then reconvened mid-February. And like you said, didn't end until last week, which is really unusual and quite taxing, because usually the session ends the first week in May. And so to have gone past Memorial Day weekend, I think a lot of the lobbyists at the Capitol and the legislators, to be fair, are definitely feeling all the workload that they had. So when they reconvened in February, I think on that very first day, 300 to 400 bills were dropped that very first day. And dropped means that they were introduced as new pieces of legislation. So legislators were hitting the ground running from day one. And our Water Resources Committee was no different. I mean, with a lot of water bills, unfortunately, last year had to kind of take a back seat because priorities shifted globally. And I think that there was a big desire to try to regain some of that momentum back and see how many bills related to water legislation and water funding, I think in particular, we would be able to get through. I will say last year as well, we experienced a lot of wildfires. So I think that also shaped the topics of bills that we've seen. So I'll group them into three, just general water bills that include research, education, and structure and things like that, water funding bills, and specifically bills related to forest fire and watershed health relief. Generally, on an average year, the CWC tracks about 24 to 27 pieces of legislation, and those are bills that we take an actual position on. This year was also unusual for us. I think we totaled around the 30 bill mark and took positions on a number of them, but not all of them. And I think that was interesting for us, you know, to not have an active position on almost every single piece is a little bit different. And I don't necessarily have an explanation as to why. I think it's because priorities were all over the place and, you know, the consequences of the last 18 months weren't quite put behind us. You know, one of the topics of interest as well was dredge and fill legislation, and that's certainly not something that is over because it is an incredibly complicated issue, and with the change in administration, you know, we still don't quite know what all of this is going to mean. So what happened is the CWC State Affairs Committee, which is the committee that tracks and plays an active role in what happens in state legislation, created a subcommittee on dredge and fill, this particular topic, with the charge of reviewing and analyzing whatever draft bill the state would potentially introduce. As it turned out, it was a very complicated topic, and the state decided not to introduce that draft bill this particular session, to take a moment to work with stakeholders, including our subcommittee, and come up with language that is a little more of a compromise, if you will, between the water community and what the state's trying to accomplish. So we'll see what happens. They're going to be meeting for the rest of the summer, and we'll see where that goes. Another carryover from last summer was our interim committees. Those are the interim committees that meet in between legislative sessions, so generally in the summer and fall months. Last year, because of the pandemic, they were I was going to say canceled, but I don't think that's the right word. They were put on pause, if you will. And so the big question mark this summer is, will the interim committees reconvene, and, you know, what kind of work are they going to have to do? Because the general charge of the interim committees is to, for legislators to work and shape particular bills that they would like to have ready to go the second the next legislative session starts. And since they missed that opportunity last summer, we're all kind of on pins and needles to see what's going to happen next. And unfortunately, the answer is we still don't know. We haven't had any announcement yet on the creation of those interim committees. There are rumblings that there may be some new ones that we haven't seen yet, but we don't really know what their schedule is going to be. And we're waiting to see who's appointed to what committee and what the plan is. But we're hoping to host the Water Resources Review Committee at our summer conference in Steamboat at the end of August, and have that be one of maybe their first meetings where we can tackle some of these complicated topics like dredge and fill, and see what happens in the fall leading up to 2022, which I think will be a more normal, or at least back to normal legislative session than what we've seen so far. So and the other thing I'll mention is we believe the governor will be hosting a special session this summer on top of the interim committees to work through the transportation and funding bills, which I think that alone is a 200-page or so piece of legislation. So the work's not over. A lot yet to be seen, but the overall, in terms of water bills this session, I think we saw a pretty successful pass rate from all the bills that we were tracking, and we supported whether it was education, research, wildfire funding. I think it was overall, all things considered, a very positive past few months. So we're glad that's over. We're looking ahead, waiting to see what happens this summer, and we're going to gear up for 2022 and see what happens there.
That's awesome. I can't believe like how it went. We all knew in January that it was going to be kind of funky, but we just didn't know quite what that would look like. But I'm glad everybody can just take a breath now because it was a lot.
Yes. It's amazing how much the remote, well, I'm glad that they were able to find a virtual alternative to continuing, because I think there was a while there where they didn't know if they'd be able to pursue a legislative session at all. So the fact that we have the capabilities remotely to keep the work going was wonderful. You know, we pushed through together, again, collaboration. We did it as a team, and that was great to see. You know, and DARCA was wonderful to have in as part of that conversation too. You know, DARCA is an active member in our State Affairs Committee meetings, and Amber and Manny Colin both are pretty regular participants, if not consistent participants, in all of our very early Monday morning meetings. Do you see that DARCA participation strengthening even more, or like what do you see for the future of DARCA in terms of being active in the legislative process?
Yeah, thank you. I sure hope so. When I first started, it was about 2 years ago, and they kind of said, yeah, you're going to be doing this. And I wasn't really quite sure what that looked like. We were more reactive than proactive. We had just come out of a season where the 811 bill was passed, and DARCA got involved really, really late. I think they were hearing it on the legislator's floor, and they realized it was going to affect water. And so they were coming out of a place that they were just like, we just need capacity for this. So we were learning as we were going. Then jump forward to this past legislative season, it was neat because we actually supported several bills, and we were in several stakeholder meeting processes, and we actually got to be involved from the beginning on several. So that was really cool for DARCA. It was a growing moment for sure, because we went from reactive to proactive and really helping to shape legislation and being supportive of it from the get-go, instead of just saying, oh no, something's happening and it's going to affect us in a really big way. So that was really neat. I think for the future, it would be really cool if we could do that a little bit more consistently. We have a volunteer board, and it's really hard when everybody has their full-time jobs. Several of them are running water, and especially when it got into late May and June, it was just really hard for some of our board members to be able to say, yes, we support it, or no, or even keep track of what was going on in the legislature. So I think moving forward, we'll find our own process, and we'll be able to come to, I don't know, just find our own way through the legislative process so that we can be a little bit more involved and just keep growing from there.
When I noticed too, even in terms of work product, that similarly to what CWC does with our bill tracking sheet, you've kind of developed a DARCA version of that.
I did, yeah. So that was new too. I had several people asking me what we were doing and that sort of thing. And I thought in the digital world, it was best to just come up with a tracking sheet and everybody had access to it. So our members actually had access to the Google Drive so that they could make comments and they could, you know, download it or print it or whatever. And then we had it on our website as well. So that was pretty neat. And then we had the same version for our board members. So it was a little bit more accessible that way too. And then we held our legislative chats every other week so that they could ask questions and figure out what was going on. With legislation, it's sometimes hard to read a bill, especially if you're not used to it. So having somebody to just explain it in layman's terms is helpful. So yeah, we also did a couple of those things too. Thanks for bringing that up.
Of course. No, bills are tough. And if you don't have any legal background, or even if you do, one paragraph can be a page long, and it just makes you feel like you're going in circles for a very long time. So any work product that we can put forward to help our members, CWC and DARCA, understand what's going on and what this means for them, I think that's where we can be really helpful. So I appreciated all these new products that you're putting forward and connecting the DARCA membership to what's going on at the Capitol. I think that's wonderful, and I look forward to see the increased involvement in DARCA in the process. It's so incredibly valuable.
Well, thank you. And we appreciate you too, because you give such a great perspective and you're always there to help too. So that's always nice too.
Thank you.
So I think that's about it. Thank you for chatting with us today. I really appreciate it. We all have so much going on now that it's June and summer, and we have kids and dogs and everything else going on. So I appreciate you both taking the time today. And I'm so glad the legislative session is over for now. But yeah, thank you so much. And I hope you guys have a really great day.
Thank you, Amber.
Thanks,
you. Michaela.
Good to see you. Bye.
Bye.